When judgment itself crashes into a hell that runs on industry, even the damned start to pray. The flames here don't punish, they produce. The demons don't fear, they harvest. But something walks through their citadels now, burning hotter than argent, colder than mercy. So what happens when hell's perfect machine meets a fire it can't contain? The hellmouth collapsed inward like a dying star, and Johnny Blaze fell through dimensions screaming fire. He had been hunting a soul thief through the burning catacombs beneath Phoenix when the ground split open and swallowed him whole. The spirit of vengeance roared inside his chest, clawing at the fabric of reality as it tore like wet paper. He felt the familiar heat of damnation rising to meet him, but this was different. This hell burned with a hunger that predated sin itself. The flames here were not metaphor or punishment, they were architecture, they were fuel. They were the skeleton of a universe built on suffering, and they recognized nothing of mercy or redemption. Johnny hit stone that was not stone. It was compressed bone and cooled blood, fused into black glass by pressures no earthly forge could match. The impact should have shattered him. Instead, the spirit exploded outward in a corona of white flame, and Johnny Blaze ceased to exist. In his place stood the Ghost Rider, skull blazing with hellfire that burned blue at its core, chains rattling from his leather jacket like serpents tasting the air. He rose to his full height and looked upon a hell that was not his own. The sky was a membrane of screaming faces stretched across a frame of iron. Rivers of molten argent energy cut through the landscape like veins of infected light, pulsing with a rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat but felt wrong, too fast, too hungry. Citadels of black stone rose in the distance, their architecture impossible, their foundations sunk into the flesh of the realm itself. Demons moved in swarms across the horizon, but they were not the damned souls or fallen angels Johnny knew. These were bred, engineered, perfected through eons of war into living weapons that knew only consumption. The spirit of vengeance looked upon them and saw guilt beyond measure. Every demon here carried the weight of 1 billion murders. Every creature bore the sin of eternal torment inflicted without end. The penance stare would not discriminate. It would not need to. This hell was a factory of the damned, and every soul within it was complicit. Ghost Rider's flames flared from blue to white, and the chains at his sides ignited with the same terrible light. The first demon to approach him died before it understood what it faced. It was an imp, all sinew and teeth, hurling plasma from clawed hands as it shrieked its hunger. Ghost Rider caught the fireball in one skeletal hand and crushed it like paper. The imp lunged. The chain snapped out faster than thought, wrapping around its neck in 3 coils before igniting. The demon did not burn. It unraveled. Its sins pulled from its body like thread from a tapestry, each crime made visible in flashes of light and screaming memory, before the creature collapsed into ash that held no heat. More came. They always did. A pack of hell razors bounded across the bone plains, their blade limbs carving the air as they closed the distance in seconds. Ghost Rider planted his feet and swung both chains in a wide arc that sang with the voice of judgment. The first chain took the lead demon across the chest, splitting it open from collarbone to hip. The second chain wrapped around the legs of 2 more, yanking them to the ground before the flames consumed them from the inside out. The remaining razors leaped as one, a coordinated strike meant to overwhelm through sheer mass and fury. Ghost Rider met them in the air. His fist drove through the skull of the nearest demon with enough force to send bone shrapnel through the others. He landed in a crouch, chains spinning around him in a defensive sphere that shredded anything that came close. When the last razor tried to retreat, Ghost Rider's chain shot out like a javelin, piercing its spine and dragging it back across the stone. He placed one boot on its chest, leaned down, and locked eyes with the creature. The penance stare ignited. The demon's body went rigid as every life it had taken, every soul it had devoured, every moment of agony it had inflicted across 10,000 years of existence played out in its mind in a single, endless instant. Its scream was not sound. It was the collapse of identity, the annihilation of self, under the weight of its own evil. When Ghost Rider released it, The demon was still alive. It simply no longer remembered how to be. He left it twitching in the dirt and turned toward the citadels. The spirit of vengeance had found its purpose here. This hell would burn until nothing guilty remained. He walked. The ground trembled beneath his boots, and the air grew thick with the scent of sulfur and ionized argent. More demons emerged from fissures in the stone, drawn by the death of their kin. They came in numbers now, not packs but legions. Mancubi lumbered forward on twisted legs, their arm cannons glowing with compressed flame. Cacodemons drifted overhead, mouths wide and filled with teeth that could bite through steel. Hell Knights marched in formation, their armor fused to their flesh, their eyes burning with hate that had no source and no end. Ghost Rider did not slow. The first volley of hellfire washed over him like rain. The flames parted around his body, repelled by the aura of judgment that clung to him like a second skin. He raised one hand, and the chains obeyed. They shot forward in twin streams of white fire, wrapping around the nearest mancubus and pulling it to the ground. The demon's cannons fired wildly as it fell, incinerating 2 Hell Knights and setting a cacodemon ablaze. Ghost Rider dragged the mancubus toward him, each pull of the chain, accompanied by a wet tearing sound as the creature's arms dislocated, then separated, then burned away entirely. By the time it reached him, it was only a torso and a scream. He crushed its skull beneath his heel and turned his gaze upward. The cacodemons descended in a swarm, their mouths opening to unleash concentrated blasts of argent-charged plasma. Ghost Rider's chains lashed out in all directions, creating a web of burning links that caught the demons mid-flight. He pulled, and the web contracted. 20 cacodemons were dragged together into a single writhing mass before the flames consumed them from within. Their bodies fused in the heat, creating a ball of molten flesh and bone that fell to the ground with a wet crash. The Hell Knights charged. Ghost Rider met the first one head-on, catching its descending fist in both hands and twisting until the arm broke at the elbow. He drove his skull into the demon's face with enough force to shatter its jaw, then spun and drove the broken arm through its chest like a spear. The second Hell Knight swung a massive blade forged from its own ribs. Ghost Rider ducked under the swing, wrapped a chain around the demon's wrist, and pulled until the hand came free. He caught the falling blade, reversed his grip, and drove it through the Hell Knight's throat so hard the point erupted from the base of its spine. The third Hell Knight hesitated. Ghost Rider's flames flared white-hot, and the demon turned to run. The chain caught it around the waist, lifted it into the air, and slammed it into the ground 10 times in rapid succession. Each impact left a crater deeper than the last. By the 10th, there was nothing left but paste and regret. Ghost Rider stood alone in a field of ash and molten stone. His flames burned brighter now, fed by the sins of the slain. The spirit of vengeance was not tired, it was not satisfied, it was barely begun. In the distance, the citadels pulsed with light. He began to walk again, and the ground cracked beneath his steps. The UAC monitoring station, buried 3 kilometers beneath the Martian surface, registered the anomaly at 0400 hours. Local time. The sensors had been tracking demonic incursions for 6 months, ever since the breach at Lazarus Labs had torn reality open and flooded the facility with Hell's endless legions. The techs on duty had seen every kind of horror the infernal dimension could produce. They had catalogued entities that defied physics, biology, and sanity itself. But this was different. The energy signature was wrong. It read as hellfire on the thermal spectrum, but the frequency was inverted. Where demonic fire consumed and corrupted, this fire purified. It burned through argent contamination, like antibodies attacking infection. The signature moved in a straight line across Hell's surface, leaving behind a trail of neutralized demonic mass that registered as simple carbon ash. One of the techs, a woman named Sarah Chen who had not slept properly in 4 months, leaned closer to her screen and whispered a question to no one in particular. "What the hell is that?" Her supervisor, a man named Marcus Webb whose hands shook unless he kept them busy, pulled up the live feed from their dimensional probe. The image was grainy, filtered through 6 layers of reality distortion, but it was clear enough. A figure walked through hell. It was humanoid in shape but wreathed in flames that burned white at their core. Its head was a skull, bare and blazing. Chains hung from its body like scripture, and where it walked, demons died, not killed, not destroyed, unmade. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. He had worked for the UAC for 12 years. He had helped design the Argent accumulation towers. He had signed off on the Soul Cube containment protocols. He had watched, helpless, as his own research was twisted into weapons that tore holes in space and time. He thought he had seen everything the universe could throw at him. He was wrong. "Get me Dr. Pierce," he said quietly. "Right now." Sarah did not move. She was still watching the feed, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Sarah." "Now." She jerked as if struck, nodded, and reached for the comm panel. Her fingers slipped twice before she managed to key in the director's encrypted channel. The line clicked open, and a woman's voice answered, cold and precise and utterly devoid of fear. "This is Pierce. Report." Marcus cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we have an unidentified entity in hell. It's moving through Kadingir Sanctum and killing everything in its path. The energy signature doesn't match any known demonic class. He stopped. "How did you explain something that should not exist?" "It's purging them," he finished lamely. "Sir, I think it's hunting." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Olivia Pierce spoke again, her voice carried the faintest edge of something that might have been curiosity or might have been hunger. "Show me." Marcus routed the feed to her terminal. He heard her breath catch, just for a moment, before the mask of professionalism slammed back into place. "Fascinating," she murmured. "A contamination event from another dimensional layer. The Argent flows must have intersected with a parallel hell construct during the last surge. This entity is likely a defense mechanism, a kind of immune response from a neighboring infernal ecosystem." Marcus frowned. That was not what he was seeing. This was not biology. This was purpose. "With respect, ma'am, that thing is not acting like a defense mechanism. It's acting like a hunter." Another silence. Then, softer. "Even better." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the blank comm panel, then back at the screen. The entity had reached the base of a citadel now. It stood before gates 20 meters tall, forged from the fused spines of some unthinkable leviathan. Dozens of Hell Knights stood guard, their weapons drawn. The entity did not slow. It walked through the gates as if they were not there, and the gates exploded into splinters of bone and flame. The Hell Knights charged as one. The entity's chains lashed out, and the demons came apart like toys. Sarah Chen crossed herself, an old habit from a childhood faith she thought she had abandoned. Marcus said nothing. He simply watched as the figure disappeared into the citadel's depths, trailing fire and judgment in equal measure. Somewhere in the dark, something ancient and powerful felt the intrusion and turned its gaze toward the newcomer. The game had changed. Ghost Rider descended into the citadel's core, and the architecture shifted around him like a living thing. The walls were not stone. They were compressed souls, their faces frozen in expressions of terminal agony, their voices reduced to a low hum that vibrated through the floor. The corridors twisted at angles that hurt to perceive, doubling back on themselves in ways that violated geometry but obeyed the logic of torment. This place was not built. It was grown, cultivated, perfected over eons into a machine designed to extract suffering as efficiently as possible. The spirit of vengeance understood this place intimately. It had walked through 1,000 hells, each one unique in its cruelty, each one convinced of its own supremacy. But this hell was different. This hell did not serve punishment, it served production. Every scream fed the Argent reactors, every death fueled the invasion. This was not damnation, this was industry. Ghost Rider's flames burned hotter. He emerged into a chamber vast enough to hold a cathedral. The floor was a lake of congealed blood, thick and black and steaming. Platforms of bone jutted from the surface at irregular intervals, connected by bridges of sinew that pulsed with stolen life. At the center of the chamber, suspended in chains of living iron, hung a machine that defied description. It was part altar, part reactor, part abattoir. Souls were fed into it from above, drawn through tubes of crystallized argent, their essence extracted and refined before the empty husks were discarded into the blood below. Ghost Rider walked onto the lake, and his boots did not sink. The blood beneath him ignited, spreading outward in concentric rings of white fire that consumed the filth and left only scorched stone. The machine shuddered, its chains rattled. Something deep within its core began to scream. From the shadows at the chamber's edge, they came. Hell priests. 3 of them, robed in flayed skin and crowned with circlets of living bone. Their faces were hidden behind masks carved from the skulls of martyrs, and their hands ended in claws that dripped with argent residue. They moved with the careful precision of surgeons, their steps synchronized, their breathing unified. They were not demons, they were worse. They were the architects of hell's industry, the priests of its unholy church, the minds behind the eternal machine. The first priest raised one clawed hand, and the blood lake erupted. Tendrils of congealed fluid shot toward Ghost Rider from all directions, each one tipped with shards of bone and laced with argent corruption. He spun, chains whipping out in a defensive spiral that severed the tendrils before they could strike. The severed pieces fell into the lake and dissolved, but more came, faster now, dozens at a time. Ghost Rider leaped. He landed on the nearest bone platform, rolled to avoid a volley of crystallized argent shards hurled by the second priest, and launched both chains at the third. The chains wrapped around the priest's torso and pulled tight. The creature shrieked, a sound like tearing metal and breaking glass, as Ghost Rider yanked it off its feet and swung it in a wide arc. The priest's body collided with a pillar of compressed souls, and the impact sent cracks spiderwebbing through the structure. The first priest gestured again, and the machine at the chamber's center roared to life. Argent energy flooded the room in a wave of corrupted light. It washed over Ghost Rider like acid, burning through his jacket and scorching the bone beneath. The spirit of vengeance recoiled, not from pain but from the sheer wrongness of the energy. This was not fire. This was stolen life, compressed and weaponized, turned into a force that existed only to unmake. Ghost Rider's flames flickered. For the first time since arriving in this hell, the spirit felt resistance. The second hell priest moved closer, its claws dripping with argent as it chanted in a language older than sin. The words pulled at Ghost Rider's essence, trying to unravel the bond between Johnny Blaze and the spirit of vengeance. The flames dimmed further. The skull cracked, hairline fractures spreading across bone that should have been indestructible. The third priest rose from the rubble, its robes torn and smoking but its body intact. It joined the chant, and the pressure doubled. Ghost Rider fell to one knee. The machine screamed louder, pumping more argent into the air. The blood lake began to rise, fed by the reactor's overflow. Ghost Rider's chains grew heavy, their fires sputtering. The spirit of vengeance was being drowned in stolen life, suffocated by the weight of 1,000,000 harvested souls. And then, from somewhere deep within the inferno that was Johnny Blaze's heart, a voice spoke. Not the spirit, not the demon. Johnny. No. The word was a spark, a refusal. A single point of human will thrust into the machinery of hell's design. Ghost Rider's head snapped up. His flames roared back to life, no longer white but burning with a color that had no name. The chains reignited, and the links shattered, reforming into something sharper, something faster, something furious. He rose to his feet, and the argent energy recoiled from him as if burned. The hell priests stopped chanting. Ghost Rider moved. He crossed the distance to the first priest in 2 strides, caught it by the throat, and lifted it into the air. The priest clawed at his hand, argent energy crackling between its fingers, but Ghost Rider's grip did not loosen. He pulled the priest close, skull to skull, and spoke in a voice that was two voices layered over each other. Guilty. The penance stare ignited. The hell priest convulsed, its mask shattered, its robes disintegrated. Its body aged 1,000 years in a single second as every crime it had committed, every soul it had harvested, every life it had fed into the machine replayed in its mind without mercy or pause. When Ghost Rider released it, the priest collapsed into a pile of ash and bone fragments that held no heat and no life. The second priest lunged, claws extended, argent blazing from its hands in twin streams of corrupted power. Ghost Rider caught both streams in his chains and pulled. The argent energy reversed, flowing backward through the priest's body and igniting it from within. The creature's screams were cut short as its torso exploded in a shower of crystallized light and blackened meat. The third priest turned to flee. Ghost Rider's chain shot out, wrapped around its ankle, and dragged it back across the platform. He placed one boot on its chest, leaned down, and whispered a single word: "Burn." The priest did not scream, it simply ceased. Its body broke down into component atoms, each one igniting and drifting away like embers on a wind that did not exist. Ghost Rider stood alone in the chamber. The machine continued to scream, its chains thrashing, its core overloading. He walked toward it, each step deliberate, each movement inevitable. When he reached the base, he placed both hands on the metal and let his flames flow into it. The machine did not break, it purified. The argent energy evaporated. The souls trapped within were released, their essences dissipating into light that rose through the citadel's ceiling and vanished into whatever lay beyond. The chains fell away, melting into slag. The reactor core collapsed inward, imploding silently, and the entire structure folded into itself until nothing remained but a crater of scorched stone. Ghost Rider turned and walked back toward the chamber's entrance. Behind him, the blood lake evaporated into steam. The citadel began to collapse. He did not run, he did not hurry, he simply walked, and the rubble fell around him without touching him. When he emerged into the open air, the entire structure groaned and fell inward, sinking into the ground as if it had never been. Ghost Rider stood on the edge of the crater and looked out across hell. More citadels rose in the distance, more machines, more sin. The spirit of vengeance smiled. If such a thing could be said to smile, there was so much work to do. Far beneath the surface of Mars, in a laboratory sealed behind 6 layers of reinforced steel and argent shielding, Dr. Olivia Pierce watched the feed with eyes that gleamed in the monitor's glow. She had seen the entity destroy 3 hell priests in under 2 minutes. She had watched it purify an argent reactor without tools, without technology, without anything but its own inexplicable fire. She had catalogued its energy signature, run it through every database the UAC possessed, and found nothing. This entity did not belong to any known hell. It was not demonic. It was not Maker. It was something else entirely, something the universe had not accounted for. She needed it. "Begin preparations for Specimen Retrieval Protocol 12, she said calmly, her voice transmitted through encrypted channels to 3 different teams scattered across the facility. "I want containment units online within the hour. Deploy a full lance of Argent turrets to the Kadingir breach point. If that thing comes through, I want it slowed enough for the tethers to lock on." One of her assistants, a young man whose name she had never bothered to learn, cleared his throat nervously. "Dr. Pierce, with respect, that entity just killed 3 hell priests. Our containment systems weren't designed for. Our containment systems were designed to hold a Titan," she interrupted, her voice sharp as glass. "They will hold this. Coordinate with the Argent Tower 3. I want a suppression field ready to deploy on my mark." The assistant nodded and hurried away. Olivia turned back to the screen. The entity was moving again, cutting a straight line toward the next citadel. Demons swarmed it from all sides, and it killed them without slowing. She zoomed in, enhancing the image until she could see the creature's skull in perfect detail. The flames that wreathed it were not random. They pulsed in rhythm, like a heartbeat, and the chains that hung from its body moved with intention, almost like thought. This was not a weapon. This was a hunter. And hunters could be trapped. She smiled, thin and cold. "Come to me," she whispered. "Let's see what you're made of." On the other side of Mars, in a holding cell that had once been a weapons testing chamber, something stirred. The Doomslayer opened his eyes. He had been resting, not sleeping. The Slayer did not sleep. He rested the way a blade rests in its sheath, waiting for the hand that would draw it. He had felt the disturbance hours ago, a ripple in hell's fabric that tasted wrong. Not demonic, not maker. Something else. Something that burned with a frequency he had not felt since the Seraphim placed the mark on his chest and set him on his eternal path. He stood, servos in his praetor-suit, humming as they compensated for his movements. The suit was scarred, dented in 100 places, scorched black in others. It had taken him through hell and back more times than the UA could count. It would take him through again. He walked to the wall of his cell and placed one gauntleted hand against the steel. The metal groaned. Outside, alarms began to blare. The Slayer stepped back, clenched his fist, and drove it through the wall in a single blow that left a crater the conceit, size of a man. He reached through, grabbed the edges, and pulled. The steel tore like paper. He stepped through the hole into the corridor beyond and began to walk toward the portal chamber. Guards appeared, their rifles raised, their voices shouting commands he did not bother to hear. He walked through them. Those who tried to stop him were knocked aside with casual force. Those who fired found their bullets flattening against armor that had withstood the wrath of hell itself. By the time he reached the portal chamber, half the facility was in lockdown, and the other half was scrambling to figure out what was happening. The Slayer did not care. He activated the portal with a single command input, keyed in coordinates he should not have known, and stepped through before anyone could stop him. The portal collapsed behind him, sealing itself with a sound like breaking glass. The Doomslayer emerged in hell, and the ground trembled beneath his boots. He stood on a ridge overlooking a valley filled with demons. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, swarming like insects toward a single point in the distance. He followed their trajectory with his gaze and saw the source of the disturbance. A figure wreathed in white fire, walking through the horde as if it were not there. The Slayer's hands tightened into fists. He began to run. Ghost Rider felt the shift in hell's attention before he saw its source. The demons had been relentless but disorganized, waves of mindless hunger thrown at him without strategy or purpose. Now, suddenly, they pulled back. They circled at a distance, snarling and snapping but refusing to close the gap. Something had changed. Something had entered the field that even hell's endless legions recognized as a threat greater than their own hunger. Ghost Rider stopped walking and turned. A figure stood on the ridge above him. It was humanoid, clad in armor the color of dried blood and scorched bronze. The armor was battle-worn, marked with scratches and dents and burns that spoke of wars beyond counting. The figure held no weapon, but its stance was that of a warrior, weight balanced, muscles coiled, ready. The spirit of vengeance looked upon the newcomer and saw something it had not expected. Innocence, not purity, not goodness. Innocence, in the truest sense of the word. This being carried no guilt. Every kill it had made, every life it had taken, had been in service of a singular purpose, the annihilation of evil. It did not kill for pleasure or for power. It killed because it was what it was made to do, and it did so without hesitation or regret. Ghost Rider's flames dimmed slightly, not from weakness but from confusion. The figure on the ridge began to descend, and the demons parted before it like water before a stone. Ghost Rider waited. The Doomslayer reached the valley floor and walked toward the burning figure with steady, unhurried steps. He had seen many things in his long war. He had fought demons and angels, machines and gods. He had walked through dimensions where reality frayed at the edges and time moved backward. But this was new. This figure burned with a fire that hell itself recoiled from, and yet it was not Maker, not Seraphim, not any force he recognized. He stopped 10 paces away and stared at the skull wreathed in flames. Ghost Rider stared back. The moment stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. Neither moved, neither attacked. They simply stood, two forces of absolute destruction, sizing each other up in a silence that hell itself seemed to hold its breath to witness. Then Ghost Rider spoke, and his voice was the crackle of dying embers and the roar of wildfire combined. "You are not guilty." The Slayer's head tilted slightly. He said nothing. Ghost Rider's chains shifted, rattling softly. "But you walk in a realm of the damned. Why?" The Slayer did not answer. He simply raised one arm and pointed past Ghost Rider toward the horizon where more citadels rose in the Pocatian distance. Ghost Rider followed the gesture, then looked back at the Slayer. Understanding passed between them, wordless and absolute. They were both hunters. They both sought the same prey. The methods differed, but the goal was identical: the complete and utter annihilation of hell's industry. Ghost Rider nodded once. The Slayer returned the gesture. And then, without further acknowledgement, they turned and began to walk in the same direction. Behind them, the demons watched in something that might have been fear. The journey to the next citadel took hours, though time in hell was a fluid thing that bent to the whims of suffering. Ghost Rider and the Doom Slayer walked in silence, cutting through waves of demons that threw themselves at the pair with increasing desperation. It quickly became clear that they did not need to coordinate. The Slayer fought with brutal efficiency, each movement economical and precise. He tore through Hell Knights with his bare hands, ripped imps apart, like wet paper, and crushed cacodemon skulls between gauntleted palms. Ghost Rider fought with mythic fury, his chains dancing through the air in patterns that seemed choreographed by some higher power. Where the Slayer killed with method, Ghost Rider killed with judgment. The demons learned, too late, that they could not overwhelm either force. By the time they reached the citadel's gates, the ground behind them was littered with corpses that stretched to the horizon. This citadel was larger than the last, its walls carved with glyphs that pulsed with argent light. The gates were sealed, reinforced with layers of interdimensional shielding that shimmered like heat haze. Ghost Rider approached and placed one hand on the barrier. His flames flared, white-hot, and the shielding began to crack. The Slayer joined him, slamming his fist into the barrier with enough force to send shockwaves rippling outward. Together, they struck again. And again. On the 5th strike, the barrier shattered, the gates exploded inward, and the citadel's defenses activated all at once. Turrets descended from the ceiling, their barrels glowing with concentrated argent charges. Hell Knights poured from side passages, 50 at a time, their weapons drawn. Mancubi positioned themselves at choke points, their cannons primed and aimed. Ghost Rider and the Doom Slayer stepped through the gates side by side. The battle that followed was not a fight, it was an execution. The Slayer moved like a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. He vaulted over a mancubus, grabbed its head mid-flight, and twisted until the spine separated with a wet crack. He landed, rolled beneath a volley of plasma fire, came up with a Hell Knight's dropped blade, and drove it through the nearest demon's chest. He pulled the blade free, reversed his grip, and hurled it like a javelin into the optical sensor of an argent turret. The turret exploded, raining shrapnel that killed 3 more demons before they could react. Ghost Rider waded through the horde with his chains spinning in twin spirals of white fire. He caught a Hell Knight around the throat, swung it in a wide arc that broke its back against a pillar, then released it into a cluster of imps that scattered like bowling pins. His chains lashed out again, wrapping around an argent turret's barrel and yanking it from its moorings. He swung the turret like a club, crushing 2 mancubi beneath its weight before releasing it into the crowd. The explosion that followed painted the walls with viscera and flame. They moved deeper. The corridors twisted and turned, but Ghost Rider's flames served as a compass, burning brighter whenever they moved towards sin's source. The Slayer followed without question, trusting the instinct of a hunter that had walked through hells older than his own. They descended into the citadel's depths, past chambers filled with machinery too terrible to name, past vats of bubbling argent and altars stained with offerings that defied comprehension. Finally, they reached the core. It was a throne room, vast and empty save for a single figure seated at its center. The Hell Priest rose as they entered, and the air itself seemed to thicken with malice. This priest was different from the others. It was larger, its robes woven from strands of solidified argent that glowed with inner light. Its mask was not bone but crystallized soul matter, transparent and pulsing with stolen life. Its claws were each the length of a sword, curved and sharp and dripping with corruption. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of a million screams compressed into a single word: intruders. Ghost Rider's flames roared in response. The Slayer cracked his knuckles, the Hell Priest gestured, and the throne room exploded into motion. The floor split open, revealing pits filled with argent reactors that hummed with barely contained power. Tendrils of living metal erupted from the walls, each one tipped with blades that could cut through dimensions. The ceiling began to descend, slowly but inexorably, lined with spikes that would impale anything caught beneath. Ghost Rider launched both chains at the priest. The chains wrapped around its torso, pulled tight, and ignited. The priest screamed, but instead of burning, it absorbed the flames. Its body grew brighter, the argent within it reacting to Ghost Rider's fire and converting it into raw power. The priest yanked on the chains, hard enough to pull Ghost Rider off his feet and send him hurtling across the room. The Slayer charged. He closed the distance in seconds, leaped, and drove his fist into the priest's mask. The blow should have shattered bone and brain alike. Instead, the mask held, and the Slayer felt the impact reverberate up his arm like striking solid steel. The priest's claw lashed out, catching him across the chest and sending him crashing into a pillar hard enough to crack the stone. Ghost Rider rose, flames burning hotter now, tinged with something darker. The spirit of vengeance was learning. This creature was not like the others. It had adapted, evolved, stolen enough divine essence to resist judgment itself. The Slayer stood, servos in his armor whining as they compensated for the damage. He reached down, pulled a chunk of broken pillar from the ground, and hurled it at the priest with enough force to shatter ribs. The priest caught it one-handed, crushed it to powder, and laughed. Ghost Rider and the Doom Slayer exchanged a glance. Then they moved as one. The Slayer attacked low, driving his shoulder into the priest's midsection with the force of a battering ram. Ghost Rider attacked high, his chains wrapping around the priest's neck and pulling in opposite directions. The priest staggered, caught between two unstoppable forces, its body beginning to tear under the strain. It roared, and the argent within it exploded outward. The blast sent both hunters flying. Ghost Rider crashed through a wall and landed in a chamber filled with suspended souls. The Slayer slammed into the descending ceiling, denting it upward before falling back to the floor. The Hell Priest stood at the room's center, its body now blazing with stolen fire, its claws extending until they were each 3 meters long. It spoke again, and this time its voice was accompanied by visions of agony projected directly into their minds. The Slayer felt nothing. His mind was a fortress, honed by eons of war into something impenetrable. Ghost Rider felt everything. The visions washed over him, a tidal wave of suffering distilled into pure sensation. He saw every soul the priest had harvested. Every life fed into the machine. Every scream stretched across centuries. The spirit of vengeance recoiled, not from pain but from the sheer weight of sin. And then Johnny Blaze spoke again. No, the visions shattered. Ghost Rider's flames turned black at their edges, laced with something beyond judgment. This was not the fire of vengeance. This was the fire of annihilation, the heat that burned when mercy itself died. He rose, and the chains in his hands became whips of solidified fury. The Slayer rose beside him, blood dripping from a dozen small cuts that his armor had not fully stopped. They moved again, faster now, coordinated without words. The Slayer grabbed a tendril of living metal from the wall, ripped it free, and used it like a chain to bind the priest's left arm. Ghost Rider's whip lashed out, wrapping around the right arm and pulling it in the opposite direction. The priest thrashed, its claws slashing wildly, but it was caught, held between two forces that refused to yield. Ghost Rider pulled tighter, and the priest's arm began to tear. The Slayer planted his feet and pulled with all his strength, and the other arm dislocated with a sound like snapping wood. The priest screamed, and the argent within it began to overload. Its body swelled, light pouring from every crack in its skin. It was going to detonate, to take them both with it in a final act of defiance. Ghost Rider released his chain and lunged forward. He grabbed the priest by its mask, pulled it close, and looked directly into its eyes. Guilty. The penance stare ignited with a fury that shook the citadel to its foundations. The priest convulsed, its body aging and de-aging in rapid cycles as every sin it had committed, every soul it had stolen, every life it had ruined, replayed across its consciousness in an endless loop. The argent within it destabilized, the stolen essence unable to coexist with the weight of its own crimes. The priest's body began to collapse inward, folding into itself like paper in a fire. Ghost Rider held on, his flames burning brighter and brighter until the entire throne room was illuminated in blinding white light. When the light faded, there was nothing left of the Hell Priest but a scorch mark on the floor. Ghost Rider released his grip on empty air and stepped back. The Slayer approached, looked down at the scorch mark, then up at Ghost Rider. He nodded once, a gesture of respect between warriors. Ghost Rider returned the gesture. The citadel began to collapse around them, its foundations no longer held together by the priest's will. They turned and ran, not from fear but from pragmatism. The ceiling caved in behind them as they sprinted through corridors that twisted and buckled. They burst through the main gates just as the entire structure folded inward, sinking into the ground with a roar that echoed across Hell's landscape. They stood side by side, watching the dust settle, and for the first time since arriving in this hell, Ghost Rider felt something close to satisfaction, but it did not last. In the distance, a new light appeared on the horizon. It was not fire, it was not argent, it was something else, something that pulsed with a rhythm Ghost Rider recognized immediately, his own flames. Someone had captured a piece of his essence, someone was trying to weaponize it. The spirit of vengeance roared, and the sound was felt across 6 dimensions. The Slayer looked at Ghost Rider, then at the distant light, and understood. They began to run toward it, and hell itself seemed to part before them. In the UAC research facility beneath Mars, Dr. Olivia Pierce smiled as the containment unit finished its calibration. Inside the sphere of reinforced argent glass, a single flame burned. It was small, no larger than a candle's flicker, but it was white at its core and pulsed with divine judgment. She had captured it during the entity's battle with the Hell Priests, siphoned off during a moment of overload when its essence had leaked into the surrounding argent field. It had taken every suppression field she had to contain it, and even now it was eroding the glass from the inside. But it was enough. It was more than enough. "Begin extraction," she commanded. "I want that energy reverse-engineered within the hour. If we can isolate the purification frequency, we can weaponize it. Imagine what we could do with fire that burns demons but leaves infrastructure intact." Her assistants moved to comply, connecting cables and feeds to the containment unit. The flame flickered, sensing the intrusion, and flared brighter. On the monitors, alarms began to sound. The entity and the Slayer had changed direction. They were no longer hunting demons. They were coming here. Olivia's smile widened. "Perfect. Seal the facility. Activate all Argent turrets. Deploy the combat drones. If they want their fire back, they'll have to go through everything we have." She turned to face the monitors, watching as 2 unstoppable forces carved a path through hell toward her doorstep. "Come on then," she whispered. "Let's see if gods can bleed." The portal between Hell and Mars had been designed as a one-way street, a carefully controlled aperture through which demons could be harvested and Argent could be extracted. It had never been intended to allow anything back through. The fail-safes were redundant, layered 12 deep, each one capable of collapsing the portal if something tried to force its way out of hell and into the facility. Ghost Rider walked through them as if they did not exist. The first fail-safe was a dimensional lock, a field designed to freeze anything caught within it in a state of quantum uncertainty. Ghost Rider's flames burned through quantum states like paper, collapsing every possibility into a single, inevitable outcome: forward motion. The second fail-safe was an Argent disruptor meant to destabilize any energy-based entity attempting passage. The flames absorbed the disruption, converted it into fuel, and burned brighter. By the fifth fail-safe, the portal was screaming. By the eighth, the UAC's monitoring systems had gone into full crisis mode. By the 12th, Ghost Rider stepped out of hell and into the facility's receiving chamber, and every alarm in a 10-kilometer radius began to shriek. The Doom Slayer emerged 3 seconds behind him, his armor smoking from the portal's collapse. The aperture sealed itself with a sound like thunder, and the chamber fell silent. They stood in a room lined with containment pods, each one holding a demon in stasis. The pods were transparent, reinforced Argent glass designed to hold titans if necessary. The demons inside thrashed as Ghost Rider passed, their eyes wide with something that might have been recognition or might have been terror. Ghost Rider ignored them. He could feel his stolen flame, a piece of his essence torn away and caged. It was close. It was calling to him. The Slayer moved to the chamber's exit and placed one hand on the sealed door. He did not knock. He did not wait. He simply pushed, and the reinforced steel buckled inward. Beyond the door, a squad of UAC security personnel stood with rifles raised. They shouted commands that neither intruder acknowledged. Ghost Rider walked forward, and the security team opened fire. Bullets struck his chest, his skull, his limbs, each one flattening against bone and flame without leaving a mark. He raised one hand, and the chains lashed out, not to kill but to disarm. Rifles were torn from hands, torn apart, reduced to scrap metal before they hit the ground. The Slayer moved through the squad like wind through grass, knocking aside weapons and personnel with equal efficiency. He did not kill them. They were not demons. They were simply in the way. By the time the squad realized resistance was futile, Ghost Rider and the Slayer were already gone, moving deeper into the facility. The corridors were a maze of steel and Argent conduits, but Ghost Rider followed his flame's call like a compass. They moved through research labs and storage bays, past containment cells holding artifacts that should never have been touched. The Slayer paused once, looking into a cell that held a familiar weapon, the crucible, pulsing with red energy. He placed one hand on the glass, and the weapon seemed to respond, its light flickering in recognition. Ghost Rider stopped, looked back. The Slayer shook his head once. Later, they moved on. The final door was 3 meters thick, reinforced with layers of steel, Argent shielding, and dimensional locks that would have stopped a Titan cold. Ghost Rider placed both hands on it and let his flames flow into the metal. The locks disengaged one by one, unable to withstand the purifying fire. The Slayer grabbed the edge of the door and pulled. Together, they forced it open, and the chamber beyond was revealed. Dr. Olivia Pierce stood at the room's center, flanked by automated turrets and shielded behind a barrier of compressed Argent energy. In front of her, suspended in the containment unit, burned the stolen flame. She smiled when she saw them. "Welcome," she said, her voice amplified through speakers embedded in the walls. "I've been waiting for you." Ghost Rider did not respond. He simply walked toward the containment unit, each step deliberate. The turrets opened fire. Streams of concentrated Argent energy lanced across the room, each one carrying enough power to vaporize a building. Ghost Rider raised one hand, and the chains spun out in a defensive web that caught the blasts and redirected them into the walls. The turrets adjusted, firing in coordinated volleys, trying to overwhelm through sheer volume. The Slayer moved. He vaulted over the first volley, landed on top of a turret, and tore its barrel off with his bare hands. He swung the barrel like a club, smashing the next turret into slag, then hurled the barrel into a third with enough force to embed it in the wall. Ghost Rider's chains lashed out, wrapping around 2 more turrets and pulling them from their moorings. He slammed them together, and the resulting explosion painted the ceiling with molten metal. Within 30 seconds, every turret in the room was destroyed. Dr. Pierce's smile did not waver. "Impressive. But let's see how you handle this." She pressed a button on the console behind her, and the containment unit opened. The stolen flame erupted outward, no longer contained, and began to grow. It spread across the floor, up the walls, consuming everything it touched. But it was wrong. The flame had been corrupted, twisted by the argent energy used to contain it. It no longer burned with judgment. It burned with hunger, a pale imitation of vengeance that sought only to consume. Ghost Rider stopped, staring at the twisted fire, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Rage. Not the spirit's rage, not divine fury. This was human anger, Johnny Blaze's anger at seeing something sacred defiled and turned into a weapon. He raised both hands, and the chains ignited with such intensity that the room filled with blinding light. The corrupted flame recoiled, sensing its progenitor, and tried to flee, but there was nowhere to go. Ghost Rider called it back, not with words but with will, and the flame obeyed. It flowed toward him, screaming as it came, and he absorbed it into himself. The corruption burned away in seconds, purified by contact with its source, and the flame returned to its proper place within his chest. Ghost Rider's fires blazed brighter than ever, fed by the reclaimed peace of his soul. He turned to face Dr. Pierce, and she stopped smiling. The Slayer stepped up beside Ghost Rider, his fists clenched, his posture radiating barely contained violence. "Doctor," Pierce raised her hands, backing toward the exit. "Wait, you don't understand. I was trying to help. That fire could have saved millions, could have turned the tide against guilty," Ghost Rider said, and his voice was quiet, almost gentle. He walked toward her, each step inevitable, and she pressed herself against the wall as if she could somehow phase through it and escape. Ghost Rider stopped in front of her, leaned down, and looked into her eyes. The penance stare ignited, but this time something was different. Dr. Pierce's sins were not born of cruelty or malice. They were born of ambition, of a desperate need to control forces beyond human comprehension, of a willingness to sacrifice anything in pursuit of progress. She had believed, truly believed, that her work would save humanity. She had convinced herself that every atrocity, every experiment, every soul fed into the machine was justified by the promise of victory. The penance stare showed her the truth. She saw every life her research had ended, every demon her portals had unleashed, every person who had died screaming in the fires of an invasion she had enabled. She felt their pain, lived their deaths, experienced the full weight of every consequence she had ignored. When Ghost Rider released her, she collapsed to the floor, alive but broken, her mind unable to reconcile what she had done with what she had believed. The Slayer looked down at her, then at Ghost Rider, and nodded. Justice, not mercy. But justice served. Ghost Rider turned, away from the weeping scientist, and walked toward the exit. The Slayer followed, leaving Dr. Pierce alone with her sins. They moved through the facility unopposed now. The remaining personnel had evacuated or locked themselves in safe rooms, unwilling to face the two beings who had torn through their defenses as if they were made of paper. Ghost Rider could feel the network of portals beneath the facility, each one a doorway to hell, each one a wound in reality that bled argent and suffering in equal measure. He stopped in the center of the main portal chamber, where the largest aperture pulsed with corrupted light, and looked at the Slayer. The Slayer understood. These portals could not be allowed to remain. They were an infection, a violation of the natural order, and as long as they existed, hell would continue to bleed into this reality. Ghost Rider raised both hands, and his flames poured out in a torrent that washed over the portal's machinery. The metal did not melt. It purified. Every argent conduit, every dimensional stabilizer, every piece of stolen hell tech burned away, reduced to inert matter that held no power. The portal flickered, destabilized, and began to collapse. The Slayer moved to the control console and began entering commands with practiced efficiency. He keyed in a sequence that would seal every portal in the facility simultaneously, overloading their containment fields and collapsing them into quantum singularities that would erase themselves from existence. The facility began to shake. Ghost Rider and the Slayer walked toward the exit as explosions rippled through the chamber behind them. The portals collapsed one by one, each one sealing with a sound like reality healing. By the time they reached the surface airlock, the entire underground complex was tearing itself apart. They emerged into the Martian night, and Ghost Rider stopped, looking up at the stars. He could feel it, the edges of this universe, the boundaries that kept hell contained. They were thin here, worn by decades of abuse and exploitation. But they were healing now, slowly, the wounds closed by the destruction of the portals. The spirit of vengeance stirred within him, satisfied but not complete. There was still work to do. Hell still existed, both here and in the dimension he had left behind. The war was not over. It would never be over. But for now, for this moment, it was enough. Ghost Rider turned to the Slayer, and they stood facing each other beneath the stars of an alien sky. The Slayer raised one fist and held it out. Ghost Rider looked at the offered fist, then back at the Slayer's helmet. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his own skeletal fist and met the Slayer's in a single, solid impact. Warriors, hunters, equals. The Slayer lowered his hand and turned, walking back toward the crater where the facility had been. He had more work to do, more demons to kill, more portals to close. His war was eternal, and he would fight it alone, as he always had. Ghost Rider watched him go, then looked down at his hands. The flames had dimmed slightly, no longer white but orange at their edges. Johnny Blaze was re-emerging, the human soul that carried the spirit taking back control. He needed to find a way home. The hellmouth that had brought him here was collapsed, but there would be others. Hell had 1,000 doors, and he knew how to walk through all of them. But before he left, there was one more thing to do. Ghost Rider closed his eyes and reached out with his essence, searching for any remaining traces of corruption, any last pocket of argent twisted reality that needed purging. He found 3 small fractures in the fabric of space, barely noticeable, but enough to serve as seeds for future invasion. He walked to each one and sealed it with his flames, burning away the corruption until nothing remained but clean space and silent stars. When the last fracture was sealed, Johnny Blaze opened his eyes and found himself standing alone in the Martian desert, fully human once more. The spirit had retreated, its purpose fulfilled, waiting for the next call. Johnny took a breath and tasted dust and thin atmosphere. He looked back at the crater where the UAC facility had been, then up at the stars, and smiled despite himself. "Hell of a ride," he muttered, and his voice was his own again. He began to walk, following an instinct he could not name but trusted absolutely. Somewhere on this planet there would be another portal, another way home, and if not, he would find one. The spirit always did. Behind him, deep beneath the Martian surface, the Doomslayer stood in the wreckage of what had once been humanity's greatest scientific achievement and felt something close to satisfaction. The portals were sealed, the demons were dead or driven back, the threat was neutralized. For now, he turned and walked into the shadows, already planning his next move. Hell was vast, infinite in its hunger, and it would try, again, it always did. But so would he. In another dimension, in the hell that Johnny Blaze called home, a ripple passed through the fabric of damnation. The demons there felt it, a tremor of fear that had no source but spread nonetheless. Something had changed. One of their own, a piece of hell itself, had been challenged and defeated by a force they did not understand. The whispers began, passed from one tortured soul to another, echoing through the endless caverns and burning pits. There was another hell, a worse hell, a hell that made their own torments look merciful, and something had walked through it and survived. The demons of Johnny's hell pulled back from their plans, from their invasions, from their schemes. Not permanently, not forever, but long enough to reconsider, to reassess, to wonder if perhaps they were not as powerful as they thought. And in the space that fear created, humanity found a moment to breathe. Johnny Blaze did not know this. He was too busy walking across an alien desert, searching for a way home, his jacket torn and his body aching but his soul intact. But the spirit knew. The spirit always knew. And deep in its core, where human will and divine purpose merged into something greater than either, the spirit of vengeance smiled. Months later, in a UAC observation post rebuilt on the ruins of the old facility, a technician named Marcus Webb sat before a bank of monitors and watched the dimensional sensors for any sign of new activity. The portals were gone, destroyed, but the instruments still functioned, still measured the space between realities for any trace of the old corruption. He saw nothing, no demons, no Argent, no breaches, just clean space and quiet readouts. He leaned back in his chair and let himself relax for the first time in what felt like years. Sarah Chen sat at the console beside him, running diagnostics on the new containment systems. They had learned their lessons. The next facility, if there ever was one, would be built with respect for the forces they sought to study, not exploitation. "You think they're really gone?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus thought about the question. He thought about the figure wreathed in white fire, walking through hell as if it were nothing. He thought about the Slayer, unstoppable and eternal, fighting a war that had no end. "No," he said finally, "they're not gone. But I don't think they'll be back here. Not unless we give them a reason." Sarah nodded, accepting the answer. They sat in companionable silence, watching the monitors, and for a little while the universe was at peace. Somewhere between dimensions, in a space that was neither hell nor earth, Ghost Rider walked through flames that burned without heat and light, that cast no shadow. He could feel the boundaries here, the places where reality grew thin enough to pass through. He chose one at random, or perhaps not random at all, and stepped through. He emerged in a desert he recognized, under a sky he knew, with the familiar weight of Earth's gravity pulling at his bones. Johnny Blaze looked around, saw the distant lights of a city on the horizon, and smiled. Home. He began to walk toward the lights, his boots leaving prints in the sand that glowed faintly before fading. Behind him, the portal sealed itself, and the spirit settled back into its eternal vigil, content. The rider had walked through a hell that was not his own and emerged unchanged. The work continued, the war continued, and in both dimensions, in both hells, the demons remembered. They remembered the fire that purified instead of destroyed. They remembered the chains that bound sin itself. They remembered the skull that burned with judgment, and the name that would be whispered in fear for eons to come. Ghost Rider. And they knew that somewhere, in some dark corner of existence, he was still hunting, still burning, still coming.